I like to occasionally post videos telling stories about my son and use them as examples of what an independent, confident, good decision maker looks like at different ages. In this video, I'm going to tell two stories. The first when my son was 9 years old, and the second when he was 12. Both of these stories were very difficult for both my wife and I to deal with at the time, because no parent wants to see their child injured, in pain in some way. But, as with any good story, although it starts out a bit dark, they both end very positive. My objective in telling these two stories is to help make it very clear the value of raising your child using the ICD parenting approach. Ultimately, it's about preparing your son or daughter for the challenges of living an adult life, of recognizing that those challenges so often can't be avoided, and the necessity to properly prepare your children to deal with those challenges. As always, before I get started, please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my videos. And if you appreciate the content, please like it and share it with someone. Now, story number one. When my son was 5, he was staying with my in-laws for a few days. It was great fun for him, and my wife and I always appreciated a few days of alone time. On night 2 of that stay, we were out walking our dogs when my wife's cell phone rang. It was her father. His first words were, "We have a situation." Turns out our son had fallen off the monkey bars at their neighborhood playground, and they were on the way to the hospital because they thought he may have broken his arm. Quiet time was over. We jumped in the car, had about a 40-plus minute drive to meet them at the hospital. Now, her father had not said much on the call, but when we walked into the emergency room, it was clear our son was hurt. He was hurt bad. Neither my wife or I had ever seen him so scared. After waiting for a ridiculously long period of time, they finally took him in to get an x-ray. My wife goes in with him. The next thing I hear is a scream like I had never heard before. He comes out of the room sweating with a look of pure terror on his face. We were sat down in a private room for a few minutes. Eventually the doctor and 2 nurses walk in and put the x-rays up on the wall, check him out. There was complete silence. His arm wasn't just broken, it was a complete compound fracture. It was a long night. He was transferred to a local children's hospital and went into surgery first thing in the morning. We were told later by the doctor that he was surprised there was no nerve damage, that the bone hadn't come out through the skin. It's tough just thinking about that night, watching our son and watching our son being wheeled into surgery, hooked up to those tubes. It's something I wish I could forget. But now let me turn this into something positive. A few years later, he's 9 years old. He broke his other arm. Yes, he's broken both his arms. This second time, my wife gets a call from his 3rd grade teacher. He's at school. She tells my wife, "Joseph says he broke his arm." My wife doesn't hesitate. We live less than 10 minutes from the school. She jumps in the car. She rushes over to get him. But this time, she doesn't find a terrified boy. She can't believe it. He says, "Hi, Mom. I broke my other arm. I'm fine. Where's the car?" This time, my wife is in shock. He tells her, "Please open the door. I got it. I'm fine. I'm holding it steady." When she gets in, he tells her to try and avoid any potholes because it'll probably hurt if the car bounces over any bumps in the road. He's just 9 years old, and he is completely in control as he tells her what happened. She told me later that he was more bummed by the injury than anything from the pain, because he knew he'd have to have a cast on for 8 weeks or so. How does a 9-year-old handle himself so well under such duress? He had another broken arm, not just a simple fracture the second time. It was broken. He explained to my wife and then the doctors what he did, answered their questions. He dealt with the whole trauma like it was just another day at the office. How did he do it? First, perspective. His first arm break was so bad, so traumatic, that his second break was like a walk in the park in comparison. From his perspective, this break was more an inconvenience when compared to the first one. You see, through experience, when you understand what a real problem is, the little problems you have to deal with, they don't seem so bad. They're little because you know what a big looks like and feels like. Second, preparation. When my son was 3, 4, 5 years old and he hurt himself, first I'd make sure I understood what the injury was, how bad it was. Let's say he was 3 and he fell down and scraped his arm and he was bleeding. If it really wasn't that bad, but he was making a big deal of it, I would pinch his leg. I'd pinch it hard. The first time I did it, he was like, "Hey, that hurt." And I would look at him and ask, "Well, does it hurt as much as your arm?" The look on his face, priceless. He had to stop and think about how much his arm hurt versus how much the pinch hurt. The pinch was generally worse. As time went by, whenever he would get hurt, I would just look at him. I'd pinch my fingers together. Most of the time, he would shake his head and say, "I'm fine, leave me alone." Perspective and preparation. My son learned very young that my wife and I would be there for him if he was really hurt, if he was having real troubles. His perspective and his preparation allowed him to distinguish between real issues and the nothing burgers. Story 2. My son was the youngest ice hockey referee in the state of Georgia for 3 years. Let me start at the beginning. Everything my son did, I encouraged him to really learn about what he was doing. When he started playing ice hockey, he was around 7, I think. When he turned 10, I encouraged him to become an ice hockey referee. There's no better way to learn the rules of a sport than to be a referee in that sport. He went through the online prep course, then he attended an all-day Saturday classroom lecture to become an official referee in the state of Georgia. I'll never forget his first game as a ref. He was 10. He was partnered with a seasoned ref, and they were reffing a house hockey game of 6 or 7-year-olds. When he got off the ice, I asked him how he liked it, and he had a big smile. And the first thing he said was, "When can I do this again?" After that first year, the Georgia Department of Labor contacted the Reffing Association and basically told them, "Are you crazy? You have a 10-year-old working." The following season, the Department of Labor put in a minimum age restriction of 13 years old for the league refs. But my son was grandfathered in. They allowed him to keep reffing. Now, let's jump forward a couple years. He's 12 years old, and near the end of that season, he was assigned to ref the Southern Youth Travel Hockey League Finals. He would be reffing 3 games, the semifinals and then the finals. The teams were squirt level. Those are 9 and 10-year-olds. However, age does not matter when it comes to the seriousness that parents place on league finals. Parents generally want to win more than the kids do, and it shows in their behavior. Now, many ice hockey rinks have stands that overlook the ice. Refs hate this because the spectators are able to lean over the railing and yell and can be heard on the ice. By the middle of the first period, I could see how bad it was going to be. A pushing and shoving match between 2 of the players. My son was on it, skated between them, broke it up. He didn't assess a penalty, just spoke to them and got play going again. Now, the real trouble started when he waved off a goal in the second period. Half the people in the rink went crazy. I heard one dad scream, "Kid ref sucks." Can you imagine that? 9 or 10-year-olds on the ice. My son, clearly a kid himself, and parents are screaming at him. My son had to skate to each of the coaches, explain the call, got the game going again. His partner that day was a high school kid, over 6 feet tall, big boy. The 2 of them looked ridiculous when they had the conference to discuss a call. There had to be a 2-foot difference in height between them. Fortunately, that high schooler was very experienced. He kept his cool, and he backed my son on every call. Now, the second semifinal game, no better. Kids playing hard, penalties all over the place, parents disagreeing with every call that didn't go their way, and letting the refs know about it. After the second game, he had a 2-hour break before the finals. He took his gear off in the locker room and walked out to my truck. I expected him to want to go get some lunch before the final game. I looked over at him. He's staring out the front window and he's crying. "Dad, I don't want to go back out there. I can't." That is gut-wrenching to hear. I knew it was bad, but I didn't realize how much it was affecting him. Now, I took a breath. I explained to him that he had to. It was his job. Working, without him on the ice, there'd be no finals game. He said, I can't do it, Dad. He didn't eat any lunch. We sat for about an hour and a half staring out the window. What do you say to a 12-year-old in that situation? I did my best. They're counting on you. Your partner's counting on you. Focus on the game. Ignore everything else. You're a good ref. I said, let's go. We went back in. He suited up, skated out there, and reffed the finals. When it was over, coaches shook his hand. Many of the players shook his hand. He continued to ref until he was 17. But those 3 games were the worst time he ever had on the ice as a ref. And I'm partially responsible for that terrible experience. That was his 3rd year of reffing. I had reffed dozens of games. He had reffed dozens of games before that, but never a travel league finals. He was an outstanding skater. He had the vision and mindset to be a very good ref. Many older, much more experienced refs over those first 2 years, they'd find me after games and encourage him to keep reffing. They'd say, he's good. He's a solid ref. He's going to be really good in the years ahead. Now, I should not have let him ref a travel league final series. My ego and his exuberance when he got that gig clouded my judgment. He was only 12. It was too much for a 12-year-old, no matter how good he was at the job. But he had learned another very valuable lesson and had an extremely valuable experience. Those games showed him with great clarity just how uncomfortable a situation could be. He absolutely would have left after the semifinals game if I let him. He could have fought me and refused to get back on the ice. He didn't. I was proud of him, of what he had done and how he had handled himself on the ice. I told him that on the drive home. Some lessons learned hurt. They're physically painful. Breaking his arm as bad as he did taught him how bad physical pain could be compared to most of the physical pain he felt in his life. Reffing those games taught him how bad psychological pain could be. In the years after that, I rarely saw him get anywhere near as upset as when he was physically injured by that first broken arm. I never saw him as upset as he had been sitting in my truck waiting for that finals game. From the 5-year-old breaking his arm the first time to the 9-year-old breaking it the second time. From the 10-year-old reffing his first game and loving it to the 12-year-old having the reffing day from hell. What changed in him after those experiences? First, it was preparation. And then the best teacher, perspective. Although part of me wishes he would have never experienced those pains, there's definitely a part of me that's glad he went through them when he did, in the way that he did. Learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable is about perspective on the uncomfortableness of the situation compared to a different situation. I would have preferred he learned those lessons some other way. But when raising an ICD adult as the parent, you have to take advantage of any situation that allows you to teach your son or daughter perspective and do the little things that help prepare them for the inevitable tough times they will face as adults. Thanks for listening.